People think graves only hide the dead, but some graves hide something worse: murder, power, and the kind of truth that can destroy an entire town. It was a cold morning buried in fog, in the oldest corner of an old cemetery where even the wind seemed to move more carefully. A 62-year-old gravedigger was doing what he had done most of his life, working in silence. In his hands was nothing but a shovel. On his clothes, the smell of dirt, sweat, and old sorrow. And in front of him, just another grave. But that morning was not just another morning, because when his shovel struck the ground, it hit metal. Not a coffin nail, not a rock. Something buried deep where it never should have been. A small rusted lockbox. And inside it, an old locket, a rain-damaged diary, and a blood-stained Polaroid. The girl in the photo was Alice Vance, a teenager who vanished back in 1976. But she wasn't alone in that picture. Standing next to her were three young men in expensive suits. Three men who would grow up to become the most powerful figures in town. The girl everyone said had run away. Maybe never ran at all. Maybe she was silenced. And now, the old man who spent his life digging graves was about to uncover a truth this town had kept buried for nearly 50 years. Friends, before we begin, make sure to leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from right now. What city, what state, or what country? I always love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. Now let's begin. By the time the church bell gave up its sixth hollow note, the fog had already swallowed the old stones. It sat low in the oldest corner of Clear Creek Cemetery, thick and gray and stubborn, clinging to the ground like it had a grudge against morning. The headstones out there were older than memory, tilted slabs, lambs with broken noses, angels worn smooth by weather and time. The iron fence along the back line had sunk into the earth so far it looked like the dead were trying to pull it down with them. Silas Boone worked in that fog the way other men worked in daylight. 62 years old, broad through the shoulders, slow in the knees, hard in the hands. His skin looked like old saddle leather, creased, windburned, darkened by decades of sun and cold. He wore a canvas coat shiny at the elbows, a wool cap pulled low, and boots with cemetery clay baked into the seams. When he breathed, steam slid out through his gray beard. He stood in a grave cut 6 feet deep, maybe a little more, his shovel bit down. Wet dirt slapped against the plank. He drove the spade again, and the sound carried strange in the stillness. Metal on earth, breath, scrape, toss. That was all. No birds, no highway hum, just a man in the ground. The plot belonged to a widow named Etta Corbin, 93, family line stretching back to when Clear Creek was 2 roads and a feed store. Her people had asked for the old section, near her parents. Folks wanted history when they got close to the edge. They wanted roots wrapped around them when the lid came down. Silas didn't mind the old section. The young men at the funeral home hated it. Too crooked, too soft in places, too many roots, too many names rubbed clean off stone. But Silas preferred the old dead. They asked less of you. They stayed where they were put. He planted the shovel, leaned on the handle, and listened. Some mornings the earth talked to him, not in words, in shifts, in weight, in that deep old language of pressure and memory. He could feel when a patch had settled wrong 30 years back. He could tell when a coffin had rotted through just by the way the ground took a boot heel. He knew where the clay ran red, where the roots spread thick, where the water hid. That kind of knowing didn't come from books. It came from spending half a life opening the ground and closing it again. He bent, cut into the wall of the grave, and paused. Something about the soil was wrong. Not the top layers. Those made sense. Loose loam, then packed brown, then the cold, damp clay shelf underneath. But deeper down, near his boot, there was a stripe of disturbed earth crossing the natural line. Narrow, man-made, bold but not old enough to belong there. Silas squatted and put his fingers to it. The dirt crumbled softer than it should have. Not root soft, not animal soft, buried soft. He looked up through the fog at the cemetery around him. All those stone eyes, all those names. Then he went back to work. He widened the cut carefully, shaving the earth instead of hacking it. The spade slid in. Dirt fell away in thin, damp ribbons. A smell rose from the opened layer, cold mud, old leaves, and something stale beneath that. sealed up too long. He worked slower now. A man who did his job right, never let curiosity make him sloppy. One more slice. Then, clang. The sound snapped through the grave like a pistol shot. Silas froze. The metal ring of it seemed too sharp for a coffin nail, too clean for a root stone. His grip tightened on the handle. For a second, he did not move at all. The fog above him drifted across the grave mouth. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and stopped. He crouched, set the shovel aside, and cleared the dirt with his gloved hands. A corner came first. Iron. Rust-bloated square, no bigger than a Bible. A little lockbox, the kind folks once kept deeds in, or wore letters or savings bonds. It had been jammed sideways into the soil below the legal burial line, hidden under enough earth to make forgetting feel permanent. Silas stared at it. No marker above, no record he knew of, no reason for it to be there. He pulled a folding knife from his coat and worked the packed clay away from the sides. It came free with a sucking sound, as if the earth didn't want to give it back. He lifted it with both hands, heavier than it looked. The box was almost eaten through with rust. The latch had fused shut decades ago. Silas stood slowly in the grave, the lockbox held against his chest, mud streaking his coat. He climbed out by the cut steps he'd made into the side and set the box on a tarp near the dirt mound. The cold had settled into his joints while he worked. He felt it now in the left knee, in the old break across two knuckles. He looked around again. Still nobody. The cemetery office sat a quarter-mile off through rows of stones and sycamores, but from here it may as well have been another county. The fog kept its own counsel. Silas took the back of the shovel and struck the latch. Once, twice. The third hit sheared it loose. The lid opened only an inch. Mud and rust held it. He wedged the knife in, pried harder, and the thing finally gave with a long, ugly groan. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in what had once been oilcloth. His hands slowed. He peeled the cloth back carefully. Water had gotten in years ago, then dried, then gotten in again. The contents were damaged but not destroyed. On top sat a tarnished silver locket on a fine chain, the sort a girl might wear under a church dress. Under that, a small diary swollen at the spine, its pale blue cover mottled dark with mildew and age. And beneath both, face down, was a Polaroid stuck to the cloth. The sight of that little diary tightened something in his chest before he even knew why. He picked up the locket first. It was cold enough to sting his fingertips. A floral engraving covered the front. Inside, after a little pressure, it clicked open. One side held the faded oval of a woman's face, probably the mother. Hair pinned up, serious mouth. The other held a girl, 17 maybe, soft-eyed, hair feathered at the shoulders in that way girls wore it in the mid-70s. There was a tiny nick in one front tooth, visible because she'd smiled without meaning to. Not posing, not polished. The smile of someone caught half a second before she remembered herself. Silas sat down hard on the folded tarp behind him. He knew that face. The name came up through him like something breaking water after a long time down. Alice. He said it into the fog and heard how old his own voice sounded. Alice Vance. For one moment the cemetery vanished, and he was 22 again, standing in the parking lot behind Clear Creek High, while a September rain turned the cinders black. People moving in knots, men shouting, sheriff's cruisers, a mother's voice going raw from using her daughter's name like it could still bring her home. Alice Vance missing. Alice Vance maybe ran off. Alice Vance probably with some boy. Alice Vance don't stir trouble. Alice Vance let it go. He swallowed. His throat felt full of dirt. Silas set the locket down and reached for the diary. The cover peeled a little under his thumb. The first few pages had fused together, but farther in he found leaves he could separate with care. The handwriting slanted tight and quick. Blue ink bled at the edges. He read only fragments at first. June 3rd, Mama says keep my head down. I seen them waiting by the gym again. If I tell what happened, nobody will believe. The line vanished into a water stain. He turned another page. Bobby laughed when I said no. Eli told me I was lucky anybody noticed me. Tom said his daddy owns half this town. Silas went still as fence wire. Names, he knew those names too. Bobby Caskey, banker's son. Eli Mercer, heir to Mercer Coal. Tom Daughtry, born into the law like it was family silver. The three of them had walked Clear Creek in pressed shirts and clean boots while the rest of the town paid their fathers to breathe. Boys people excused before they spoke. Boys who became men no one questioned. Men who still ran this town. A gust of wind moved through the oaks and made the fog shudder. Silas looked at the last item, the Polaroid, still stuck face down to the cloth. A dark brown smear stained one white edge, dried long ago. He touched it with a knuckle, not mud. His hand hesitated, then he turned it over. The photograph had yellowed with age, but the image remained. Alice stood at the center in a thin yellow blouse, eyes wide, shoulders drawn in. One of the boys had a hand around her upper arm, not playful, not gentle, just there like a clamp. Bobby on one side, Eli on the other, Tom slightly behind. They were young, but even there you could see what money had already taught them. How to stand like consequences belonged to somebody else. The expensive suits hit Silas first. Not Sunday good. Better than that. Tailored. Family money on display. Then he saw Alice's face, not smiling. And there on the white bottom border of the Polaroid, half rubbed away by moisture, someone had written in blue pen, Mine Entrance Road, July 18th. After dark, a bloodstain crossed the date. Silas felt the world narrow around that photograph. His pulse began to pound, slow and hard, in his throat and temples. The cold air in his lungs burned. Memory moved through him in ugly pieces. A flashlight beam cutting rain. A deputy saying she'd probably taken off. Somebody at the diner whispering that a girl like Alice ought to know better than to mix with boys like that. He remembered something else too. The funeral that never happened. No body, no grave. Just a mother who wore black for 10 straight years and then died with her curtains closed. Silas sat alone in the fog with a Polaroid in his hand and the open grave beside him. After a while, he folded the oilcloth back over the box's contents and stood. He moved with the careful slowness of a man trying not to drop the past. He carried the lockbox to his truck, an old Ford with one rusted fender and a heater that only worked downhill, and set it under the seat. Then he went back to the grave and looked down into it, below the legal depth, below where anything should have been. He studied the cut of the soil again, the disturbed line, the old concealment. Somebody had put that box there on purpose, deep enough to vanish. Not in a grave, but under one. Under future burials. Under decades. Under the weight of everybody else's dead. Hidden for good. Unless the earth got tired of keeping secrets. Silas climbed down, finished the grave in a kind of silence that felt different now, and every scrape of the shovel sounded like a countdown. By the time the sun tried and failed to burn through the fog, the hole was done. Straight walls, proper depth, clean corners. No one looking at it would know the ground had just coughed up a girl the town had buried without a body. At noon, when the hearse rolled in and the widow Corbin's family gathered beneath black coats and umbrellas, Silas stood off beneath a cedar and watched the casket descend. The preacher's voice drifted thin in the damp air. People dabbed their eyes. Gloves held folded programs. Everything solemn, everything proper. Silas barely heard a word. He kept seeing the blood on the Polaroid. Kept seeing Alice's arm in that boy's grip. Kept hearing names he had not said out loud in 40 years. After the family left and the grave was closed, Silas loaded his tools in the truck and didn't drive back to the office. He signed nothing, reported nothing, just pointed the Ford toward the edge of town where his cabin sat in a fold of woods above Clear Creek itself. The road wound past the high school, though it had a new brick gym now, past Mercer Coal's shuttered rail spur, past the bank where the Caskey name was still carved over the columns in stone, past Town Hall with its white pillars and the memorial wing built after some long ago accident everybody had quit asking about. The town looked normal in the late afternoon. Folks buying feed, kids on bikes, flags hanging from porches, smoke out of chimneys. A town like any other. A town that knew how to smile with its mouth shut. By the time he reached his cabin, the light was already thinning. The place sat alone among sycamores and oak, with a workshop out back and stacks of split wood under tin. He carried the lockbox inside, set it on his kitchen table, and lit the lamp, though there was still some gray daylight left. The room smelled of coffee grounds, old pine boards, radiator heat, and the faint mineral scent that never really left his clothes, and no matter how hard he scrubbed, the smell of turned earth. He took off his coat and sat. Then he laid the locket, the diary, and the Polaroid out under the yellow lamp. Outside, wind moved through the trees with a dry whisper. Inside, the house gave its usual settling pops. Silas reached for the first page he thought he could still read, and somewhere deep inside him, under all the years and funerals and weather and work, something old and buried shifted awake. He did not yet know that by morning the whole town would be hunting what he had found. He only knew this: Alice Vance had not run, and the ground itself had finally decided it was done, lying for the men who said she had. Night came early in the woods around Silas Boone's cabin. By 7, the windows were black mirrors. The lamp over the kitchen table made a tight yellow circle, and beyond that circle, everything faded into shadow. The stove, the shelves, the old army blanket over the chair by the fireplace. Wind worried at the eaves, radiator pipes clicked inside. Somewhere outside, a branch scraped the roof with a dreary fingernail sound. Silas sat at the table with reading glasses low on his nose and Alice Vance's diary spread open on a folded towel. He turned the pages like he was handling skin. Some entries had been lost to water entirely. Ink dissolved into blue bruises, whole days washed blank. Others survived in fragments, enough to make the dead girl feel close. Close enough to hear, close enough to smell the drugstore perfume and notebook paper and June sweat of a 17-year-old in 1976. He read a line, then another, and the years peeled back. June 8, Mrs. Halpern told me I ought to apply to nursing school in Charleston. I laughed because we can barely keep lights on. She got quiet after that. Silas could see Alice's house on Birch Lane as if he were standing there now. Small white clapboard gone gray with age, porch steps leaning, one curtain pinned because the rod was broken. Her mother worked the lunch counter at Merle's Diner. Her father had died in the mine when she was 10, crushed in a roof fall Mercer Cole blamed on unpredictable conditions. The town sent a ham and a pastor. Mercer sent nothing. Alice had been one of those girls people called pretty only after she disappeared. Before that, they said other things. Too quiet, too proud for what she comes from. Thinks she's better, or worse. Folks in Clear Creek like people to stay in the box they were born in. It made life easier for everybody who built the boxes. Silas rubbed his jaw and kept reading. June 11th, Bobby waited by my car, said he could take me anywhere I wanted, said girls like me ought to know when luck comes knocking. I said I didn't ask for luck. He laughed like that was cute. Silas closed his eyes. He remembered Bobby Caskey young, blonde, broad-faced, pink from liquor and money, with the kind of smile that always looked like it was halfway to an insult. Even at 18, he already had his father's habit of touching men on the shoulder when talking to them, as if to remind them who could afford to be friendly. Eli Mercer had been leaner. Meaner around the eyes, the kind who spoke softly so people leaned in and only later realized he'd just cut them open. And Tom Daughtry, sheriff's son back then, police chief now, had learned early that a badge, even when borrowed from family, made ordinary people lower their eyes. 3 boys raised on inheritance and immunity. 3 boys a poor girl was expected to endure politely. Silas stood, crossed to the stove, and poured coffee from the enamel pot he kept warming low on the back burner. It was bitter and scorched. He drank it black. The heat sat in his chest without helping. When he came back, he opened the locket again and stared at Alice's small photograph. The flash had caught a little shine in her eyes. Not fear, not yet, just youth. The last clean season of it. He set the locket beside the diary and read deeper. June 9. Saw them at the quarry road after church. Tom asked if I was too good to ride with them. I said I had to get home. Eli said, "You always got somewhere to be when we show up." I told him maybe that ought to tell you something. I was shaking so hard after I could barely get the key in. Silas breathed out slowly. He remembered the class system in Clear Creek the way a body remembers pain and old injuries. Not theory, not politics, just facts you lived inside. Who sat near the front in church and who near the back? Whose sons got warned and whose got cuffed? Who could wreck a pickup drunk at midnight and have it disappear by dawn? Who got jobs at the bank? Who dug the ditches? Who went away to college and came back with office keys waiting? Who stayed and learned how to keep their heads down? Silas had grown up on the wrong side of every one of those lines. His own father laid brick until he died coughing. His mother cleaned the bank after hours, emptying ashtrays under portraits of dead caskies and gilt frames. Silas had worked cemetery grounds since he was 19 because it was steady and because dead people didn't ask who your people were. Back in the summer of 1976, he'd been 22 and strong enough to swing a sledge all day. He drove an old Chevy with bad shocks and still thought some truths, once spoken plain, would matter. Then Alice vanished. The memory arrived so sharp it made him set the coffee down. July heat, cicadas screaming, the taste of dust. Mrs. Vance standing outside the sheriff's office in a house dress and scuffed shoes, hair coming down, saying Alice hadn't come home, saying this wasn't like her, saying please. Silas had been there because he came to town for a burial permit. He remembered the way the front desk deputy wouldn't meet the woman's eyes, remembered Sheriff Daughtry stepping out in shirt sleeves, telling her girls that age got restless, telling her not to work herself up, telling her maybe wait till morning. Wait. A poor mother asks for help and gets told to wait. By the next afternoon, when it was clear Alice still hadn't turned up, half the town knew. Men searched the woods a little. They drove creek roads, said the right things in public. But the search never had teeth. Not real teeth. No state men called in. No roadblocks. No pressure. Where it belonged. And then the story started. Alice was seeing someone. Alice wanted out. Alice stole money from her mother. Alice hopped a bus. Alice had a temper. Alice probably got herself mixed up in something. The official story came so fast it felt pre-written. Silas picked up the Polaroid again. Mine Entrance Road, July 18th, after dark. He frowned. The date didn't sit right. He turned back through the diary until his fingers found pages near the end, where the entries became more frantic. Closer together, the handwriting more jagged. July 14th, they followed me from Merle's. Bobby said if I keep acting holy, I'll be sorry. Tom laughed. Said nobody listens to girls who flirt then cry. I never flirted. I never did anything. Another page, July 16th. I told Mama I might leave after graduation no matter what. She said with what money? I said I'd find a way. I did not tell her why. Then, on a page warped nearly through, July 18th, they sent word through Lana to meet by Mine Entrance Road after dark if I want them to stop. Lana said they were drunk and stupid and maybe just want to scare me. I should not go. I know I should not go. But if I do not, they will keep coming if anything happens. The rest had bled into nothing. Silas stared until the letters blurred. He remembered July 18th, 1976. Sunday. There'd been a storm that night. Hard rain, black clouds rolling in over the ridge. He remembered because he and two other men had spent half the evening tying down tarps at the cemetery shed so the wind wouldn't rip them loose. If Alice went out that night, the road to the old mine entrance would have been slick as axle grease. Half mud, half runoff. No place for a girl alone. He stood and walked to the window, though there was nothing to see in the dark glass but himself, 62 now. Gray beard, heavy shoulders stooped a little with years of lifting. Eyes set deep and tired under a brow that had grown hard from looking into weather and grief. He remembered being 22 and seeing Alice at Merle's once, carrying plates, hair pinned up, with a pencil. She laughed at something another waitress said. Just for a second, a clean laugh. Then Bobby Caskey walked in with Eli and Tom, and the sound had died right off her face. Silas hadn't done anything. That fact sat down beside him often as the years passed, but tonight it took the chair across the table and looked him straight in the eye. He had seen enough to know she was afraid. Not everything, but enough. He had seen her flinch when those boys entered a room, seen how Sheriff Daughtry's deputies treated them like young princes, heard things said in the barbershop and feed store. Dirty talk, jokes, bragging, dressed up as rumors. He had known danger was circling her, and he had done what most men did when the powerful got dirty. He minded his own living. That was the bargain in towns like Clear Creek. You looked away and called it survival. You told yourself it was none of your business until one day you woke old and realized silence had a body count. He sat again and turned the last pages. Near the back, tucked between two warped leaves, he found a small piece of folded paper. It cracked at one corner as he opened it. Not diary paper, stationery. Torn from a legal ad, just one sentence in a hand different from Alice's. Don't trust Tom if he says the others don't know. He lies first, no signature. Silas read it twice. Then he read it a third time. A witness. Maybe. Somebody close enough to know their pattern. A girlfriend. A boy with a conscience. Someone who tried to warn her and then kept quiet for 40 years. He put the note down and pressed both palms flat to the table. The room was warm, but his skin had gone cold under the flannel shirt. Outside, gravel crunched, not the random pop of branches. Tires. Silas lifted his head. Headlights moved across the wall in a pale sweep, then stopped. An engine idled in the driveway. He killed the lamp. Darkness folded over the room. He stood without a sound and moved to the side of the window, easing the curtain with 2 fingers. Through the gap, he saw a car sitting just beyond the porch light's reach. Newer than anything owned by most folks around here. Dark sedan, long hood, gloss paint catching the weak moonlight between branches. It sat there for maybe 20 seconds. Then the engine revved softly, the car backed out, and the taillights vanished through the trees. Silas held still another full minute. When he finally let the curtain fall, the house felt different, smaller, less private. He turned the lamp back on and looked at the diary, the locket, the photo. Word had not had time to spread. He had told no one, which meant one of 2 things. Either somebody had seen him dig in that old section and followed him, or somebody had been waiting 40 years for the earth to betray them. He gathered the items fast now, not panicked, methodical. He wrapped the diary and photograph in wax paper, slid them into a flower tin from the pantry, and tucked the locket inside an old tobacco pouch. Then he crossed to the fireplace, knelt, and pulled up the loose stone at the left edge of the hearth. The cavity beneath held cash, his late wife Ruth's wedding ring, and 2 old service medals that belonged to his brother. He added the tobacco pouch there, replaced the stone, then stopped. The diary did not go there. Too obvious if somebody knew him well. He looked toward the back door, toward the small workshop, and beyond that, the low shed where the funeral home kept spare casket hardware and damaged stock waiting to be scrapped. His mouth set. That would do. He put on his coat again, took the flower tin, and stepped out into the night. The cold had sharpened. Leaves whispered overhead. He moved without a flashlight, didn't need one. He knew every root and rut between the porch and the outbuildings. In the shed, among the stacked lids and boxed hinges and the dry odor of pine and lacquer, he opened an old infant casket no family would ever use. Its satin lining foxed with age, one handle missing, and tucked the flower tin beneath the mattress board. Then he closed the lid and stood listening. Nothing, only wind. Back inside, he bolted the door and returned to the table. He should have been frightened. Maybe part of him was, but underneath that, stronger than fear, a different feeling had begun to rise. Slow, heavy, purposeful. He looked at the old pages and saw not just a dead girl's words, but a pattern he'd watched this town repeat all his life. Men with money and office and old family names doing what they pleased. Everybody else expected to accept it as weather. Not this time. Silas sat until midnight reading what remained. By the end, he knew enough to make his stomach turn. Alice had not been a runaway. She had been cornered, pressured, threatened, hunted in plain sight by boys the town would later call leaders. And somewhere between Mine Entrance Road and Morning, she had disappeared into the mouth of a lie so wide it had swallowed a whole town's conscience with her. At midnight, he closed the diary, rubbed his eyes, and let memory have one last pass at him. He saw Mrs. Vance 3 weeks after the disappearance, standing in Merle's with coffee going cold in front of her, while 2 women at the counter lowered their voices when she looked over. He saw flyers peeling off telephone poles. He saw young Bobby Caskey laughing outside the gas station while people pretended not to notice how quickly laughter came back to him. He saw himself then too, passing the sheriff's office, hearing a deputy joke inside that some girls just liked attention, walking on. He had carried that cowardice for 50 years without naming it. Tonight the name came easy. By the time he banked the stove and headed for bed, dawn was still hours off. He paused at the kitchen table one more time and touched the edge of the Polaroid. "Ain't nobody running this one into the ground again," he said. His voice was low, but it held. The room gave back the words in a dull wooden hush. Silas went to bed fully clothed except for his boots. The shotgun stayed under the mattress, not because he expected to use it, but because a man old enough to know our evil also knew when it had started moving. Sleep came in short, bad pieces. Rain dreams, headlights, a girl in a yellow blouse looking over her shoulder. Just before dawn, Silas woke to the first thin calls of crows and lay in the dark listening to his own breathing. The official story had lasted 40 years. By breakfast, he meant to start killing it. Clear Creek looked harmless in the morning. That was one of its better tricks. The diner windows glowed warm. Men in work jackets stood outside the feed store with coffee steaming in paper cups. School buses sighed at corners. The courthouse flag moved lazy in the pale light. Anybody passing through would have seen a mountain town trying its best to hang on. Old brick, neat porches, hard faces softened by routine. But Silas knew what lay under polished surfaces. He'd spent his life lowering people into earth that looked calm from above. He parked his Ford across from Merle's diner and watched the street for a minute before going in. The bell over the door gave a tired jangle. Bacon grease, hot coffee, and dishwater steam hit him all at once. The place hadn't changed much since the 70s. Same cracked red stools, same pie case by the register, same long mirror behind the counter, though now the silver had darkened at the corners, so people appeared to be fading while they ate. A few men looked up when Silas entered, then looked back at their plates. He was known in town the way the cemetery was known, always there, easy to ignore until you needed it. "Morning, Silas," said Jolene from behind the counter. She was younger than him by 10 years, but looked more tired. "Usual?" He nodded and took the end stool. Coffee came first, black and strong enough to clean a battery terminal. He wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat seep into his fingers. "What's the news?" he asked without much interest in his tone. Jolene snorted softly while wiping the counter. "Same foolishness. Mayor's throwing himself another event. Centennial celebration over at Town Hall on Saturday. Speeches, ribbons, fake smiles. Heard they're unveiling some donor plaque in that memorial wing. Everybody that matters will be there." Silas lifted his eyes. "Everybody that matters," he repeated. She caught the edge in his voice and gave him a look. "You know what I mean." Yeah, he did. The mayor, Robert Caskey now, though half the town still called him Bobby when he wasn't around. The bank boy, grown thick through the neck, silver at the temples, and practiced at public concern. Police Chief Thomas Daughtry, jaw set like he'd been carved for disapproval. Eli Mercer, richest landowner in 3 counties, his family's coal money repackaged into real estate and clean philanthropy. The sons of the soil. Alice had named them when they were boys. Now they wore office and respectability like fresh coats of paint over rot. Jolene slid eggs in front of him. "You hear about Delbert Sykes?" "No." "Died in his sleep, 91. Family wants him up on the ridge." She shrugged. "Guess I'll be seeing you carrying a shovel again." Silas grunted. As he ate, he let the diner chatter wash over him. Prices, back trouble, weather, basketball. Then 2 stools down, a man in a camo cap said, "Town's lucky we got steady hands at the top. Plenty of places it'd kill for leadership like ours." His friend nodded. "Caskey kept that paper mill closure from ruining us. Daughtry's the only reason drugs ain't worse. And Mercer's built half the new housing." Silas chewed slowly and said nothing. That was how corruption aged in places like this. It stopped being spoken of as fear and started being spoken of as stability. When he finished, he paid cash and left a decent tip. On the way out, he stopped by the flyer board near the door. Church suppers, yard sales, lost dog. One bright new poster in patriotic colors. Clear Creek Centennial Celebration. Honoring our past, building our future town hall. Saturday, 6 p.m. At the bottom sat 3 names in bold. Mayor Robert Caskey, Chief Thomas Daughtry, Elias Mercer. Silas read them a long moment. Then he stepped back into the cold. He spent the next hour in his truck parked up the hill from Town Hall, watching people come and go. The building stood in clean white brick with black shutters and fresh wreaths on the doors, proud as a courthouse in a place too small to deserve one. The memorial wake jutted off the east side, newer than the rest but made to look old. Brass plaque by the entrance, stone benches, a flower bed gone brown for winter. Accidental electrical fire, folks had called the event that led to the wing's construction 20 years ago. Archives damaged, records lost, insurance paid, renovation blessed as civic rebirth. A flood ruined the basement records a few years after that, if memory served. Too many accidents in buildings where paperwork mattered. Silas drove onto the cemetery office instead. The structure sat by the front gate, a squat building with a tin roof and a narrow records room attached at the back. He had keys to the maintenance side, not the archives cabinet, but older places always had older habits. And older habits meant doors that didn't latch right. He went in through the supply room. Mops, weed killer, folded chairs, the stale smell of paper and damp heat. No one was in yet but Bev, the part-time secretary, and her radio down the hall told him she was up front doing invoices. Silas eased into the records room and shut the door without clicking it. Metal filing cabinets lined two walls. Shelves sagged with ledgers, plat maps, burial permits, death certificates. Dust lay over everything in a fine gray coat. One narrow window let in weak light that made the room look underwater. He knew roughly what he wanted. Any cemetery logs or municipal correspondence from summer and fall of 1976. Officially, missing persons belonged with the sheriff. But in small towns, scraps drifted everywhere. Notes, requests, burial inquiries, things people filed where they could rather than where they should. He started with the cemetery ledgers, delicate pages, longhand entries, lot numbers. He ran his finger down the July columns, names he half remembered. An infant, a retired teacher, a mine mechanic. No Alice Vance. Of course not. No body, no burial. Then he found something stranger. A notation in August 1976 written in pencil lighter than the rest. Section E perimeter maintenance restricted by town order until further notice. No explanation. Section E was the old fog-bound corner where he'd found the lockbox. Silas leaned closer. Beside the note was an initial. T.D. Thomas Daughtry. Back then too young to sign anything official unless his father let him, which meant even as a deputy or helper he had hands in it. Silas copied the page number onto a scrap from his pocket. He moved to municipal correspondence boxes stacked low on the shelf. July, August, September 1976. He found letters about mowing, storm damage, veterans markers, budget complaints. Then an empty folder tabbed, Vance, Alice, inquiry empty, not sparse, not partial, clean empty, the kind of empty that had been made on purpose. Silas slid the folder free and looked inside again, like different eyes might produce paper. Nothing. His jaw tightened. He checked the neighboring folders. Vance, Martha. Indigent assistance. Still stuffed. Vane, Clifford. Monument payment. Still stuffed. Only Alice's had been gutted. From the front office, Bev laughed at something on the radio. A drawer banged shut. Silas held still until the sound passed. Then he went lower to a cabinet drawer swollen with moisture and found property maps. One old plat showed the cemetery lines before expansion. Section E said exactly where the oldest family plots ended and the town-owned strip began. No modern grave should have required digging that deep there, unless someone wanted to use future burials as cover. He put the maps back and reached for the final shelf, miscellaneous reports, unlabeled binders, loose clippings bundled with rubber bands gone brittle. That was where he found the newspaper. One edition of the Clear Creek Ledger, July 22, 1976, folded inside a county budget binder as though hidden there by a clerk with guilty hands. The front page headline read, "Local girl possibly left town. Sheriff says there was Alice's school photograph, grainy and too formal to resemble the girl in the locket." The story quoted Sheriff Walter Daughtry saying, At this stage, there is no evidence of foul play, and young women her age sometimes leave voluntarily. It mentioned unnamed sources who claimed Alice had been restless and seen with older youths. Silas's nostrils flared. Older youths, that was how they did it. Never named the powerful boys, just blurred them into rumor until the blame drifted naturally toward the missing girl. Then he saw a paragraph near the bottom. A search near Mine Entrance Road was conducted and yielded no significant findings. Mine Entrance Road, July 22nd, 4 days after the date on the photograph. They had known exactly where to look. His pulse ticked harder. He folded the paper and slipped it inside his coat. The doorknob turned. Silas didn't jump. He just straightened and held the open ledger in his hands as the door swung inward. Police Chief Thomas Daughtry filled the frame. He had aged into a heavier version of the boy Silas remembered. Thick chest, close-cropped, white hair, cold blue eyes that never seemed to blink enough. His uniform fit too well, his boots too clean. He wore no hat, just authority. For a second, neither man spoke. Then Daughtry looked at the ledger, then at Silas. Didn't know we were auditing history today. Silas closed the book with careful hands. Delbert Sykes' family wants the ridge section, checking old lot boundaries. Daughtry stepped into the room, shutting the door behind him with a quiet click. The sound was soft, but it changed the air. Bev said she heard you and back. His voice held the easy politeness men use when they want to make sure you hear the threat under it. Thought I'd save you the trouble if you were looking for permits. I wasn't. Daughtry's eyes moved around the room. Filing cabinets, dust, Silas's hands, his coat, then back to Silas's face. You've been in the old section a lot lately. I work at a cemetery. One corner of Daughtry's mouth moved, not a smile, more a muscle remembering one. Found anything you weren't supposed to? Silas let the question sit between them. Supposed to by who? The chief took another step forward, seemed not aggressive, worse than that, familiar, intimate in the way men get when they think ownership is already settled. You know, Silas, one thing I've always respected about you, kept to yourself, did your bomb, never made noise. Silas said nothing. Daughtry nodded once, like confirming an old file in his head. That kind of good sense is rare now. He reached past Silas, pulled the empty Vance Alice inquiry folder from the shelf, and tapped it lightly against his palm as if he'd known exactly where it was. Funny thing about records, he said. They rot. Floods, fires, sloppy storage. Then people start remembering things wrong. Happens all the time. Silas looked at the folder, then at Daughtry. Some things rot because somebody helps them. For the first time, the chief's face cooled all the way down. Careful. Silas did not lower his eyes. Been careful 40 years. Didn't do Alice much good. There it was, the name. Daughtry held still. From the front office, the radio kept playing some old country tune about regret and whiskey, tinny and far off. In the little records room, the silence felt packed tight as clay. When Daughtry spoke again, the softness was gone. That girl's tragedy was handled. Handled, Silas repeated. That's right. Silas took the folded newspaper from inside his coat and let just the corner show. Not enough for the chief to grab, enough for him to recognize newsprint. Search near Mine Entrance Road 4 days after she vanished. You all knew where to look before the town did. Daughtry's eyes flicked once, quick and sharp. A tell. You're too old to go digging where you don't belong, he said. Silas almost laughed at the choice of words. Seems I've been doing it most my life. For half a second, something ugly moved behind Daughtry's face. Old arrogance, maybe fear, maybe both. Then he tucked the empty folder under his arm. Let me help you, he said. A man your age finds himself tangled in old nonsense. He can get confused. Start seeing patterns that ain't there. Start putting weight on junk. Sentimental junk. Silas's voice stayed level. Did Alice look sentimental when you buried her story? Daughtry stepped in close enough now for Silas to smell his aftershave over starch and leather. You don't know what you're talking about. No, Silas said, but I'm learning. They held each other's gaze. Then Bev called from the front. Chief, you still back there? Daughtry didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on Silas another long beat. Then he straightened his cuffs, tucked the folder back on the shelf, and opened the door. As he stepped out, he said without turning, "Whatever you think you found, put it back in the ground." The door stayed open behind him. Silas stood alone among the records, his heartbeat slow and hard. That had not been denial, it had been instruction. He waited a full minute before moving. Then he replaced the ledgers, checked the hall, and left through the maintenance door without speaking to Bev. Outside, the sky had gone low and colorless. Wind pushed dead leaves around the cemetery drive. Silas walked to his truck, feeling the town shift around him. Invisible gears, old loyalties, eyes that would start following him now. In the cab, he took out the newspaper and smoothed it on the steering wheel. The ink smelled faintly musty, sweet with age. Older youths, no significant findings. Handled. The diary names burned in his mind. Robert Caskey, Thomas Daughtry, Elias Mercer. The sons had become the fathers of the town. They held the bank, the law, the land. Permits, loans, contracts, police reports, newspaper ads. Enough to bend memory itself. And now he held a dead girl's account of what they'd done before they wore titles. He was not foolish enough to miss the shape of his situation. The diary was not just evidence. It was a death warrant. Maybe for them, if truth ever got air. Maybe for him first, if it didn't. He drove out past the cemetery gates and headed not home but back toward the old section where the fog still clung even in daylight. He parked by the maintenance shed, took a narrow probing rod and a hand trowel from the truck, and walked among the leaning stones. Section E waited quiet as ever. Moss, lichen, broken lambs, a little iron gate hanging by one hinge. People buried before electricity, before cars, before the names Caskey and Mercer and Daughtry meant what they came to mean. Silas stood near Etta Corbin's fresh grave and studied the ground around it. He replayed the disturbed soil line in his head, the depth, the angle of the lockbox. Somebody had hidden items there in haste but not panic, deep concealment. Maybe after the fact, maybe because a box was easier to bury than a body. A chill moved through him that had nothing to do with weather. The box was a secret stash. Insurance, trophy, or conscience. Not the whole of it. He crouched and pressed the probing rod into the ground 3 feet off the new grave's south edge. Then another spot, then another. Feeling for voids, roots, old coffin collapse, unnatural resistance. His hands moved with the confidence of decades. Tap, sink, pause. Withdraw, shift, tap again. On the fourth insertion, 6 inches deeper than expected, the rod met loose fill, not natural settling, a narrow vertical seam. Silas marked the place with a twig. Then he stood and looked out across the cemetery at the line of oak trees, their branches black against a white sky. "I hear you," he said quietly, not sure whether he meant Alice or the earth. By the time he turned back toward his truck, he understood 2 things clearly. The men who ran Clear Creek knew he'd started asking the wrong questions. And whatever they had done in 1976, they had not buried it all in one place. The wind came harder by afternoon, pushing ragged strips of fog through the old cemetery like breath through broken teeth. Silas spent 2 hours pretending to do ordinary work. He sharpened a mower blade that did not need sharpening, coiled hose, logged fuel use, nodded at a delivery driver. Every motion was deliberate, every minute bought for thought. A man who had lived this long knew haste belonged to younger fools and guilty men. The trick now was not speed, it was precision. At 3 o'clock, he drove back into town and parked behind the old municipal annex, a red brick building squeezed between town hall and the library. Few people went there anymore except clerks, tax stragglers, and lost citizens trying to find permits from administrations long dead. The county had digitized some records over the years, but Clear Creek's real past still lived in basement file boxes and steel cabinets with bad locks. Silas had learned that if you wanted truth in a town like this, you rarely found it where important men said it would be. You found it where lazy men forgot to finish hiding it. Inside, the annex smelled of old paper, floor wax, and radiator steam. A Christmas wreath still hung on one wall, Though it was March, the ribbon faded to a tired pink. A receptionist in bifocals looked up from a crossword. "Can I help you?" "Need to see old building permits," Silas said. "Town Hall Edition. Memorial Wing." She blinked. "For what purpose?" "Settlement issue. Ground shift near cemetery runoff." He said it flat enough to sound boring. That helped. She pointed downstairs. "Records room. If Martha's there, sign in." Martha was there, 70 if she was a day, cardigan button wrong, chewing peppermint, and peering over half-moon glasses at a monitor that looked older than sin. She knew Silas by sight. "What are you after?" "Town Hall Memorial Wing plans, construction year, contractors, original foundation notes." "That all?" "For now." She handed him a clipboard. "Don't remove anything, don't rearrange my drawers." Wouldn't dream of it. The basement room held rows of shelving and gray document boxes, the kind that made everybody sneeze. A heater banged in the corner. Overhead fluorescent lights hummed like flies. Silas found the municipal structures section and began pulling boxes. He located the Memorial Wing file under Town Hall East Annex, 1998-2001. Inside, bids, structural drawings, invoices, letters of appreciation, contractor insurance, fundraising brochures heavy on civic pride. The official narrative emerged fast. A small electrical fire in the old annex had damaged historical display space. The town, led by a visionary coalition, Caskey, Mercer, Daughtry among others, raised money to build the new memorial wing as a bridge between memory and future. Silas read every page. At first glance, it was all clean. Too clean. The plans showed shallow spread footings on compacted fill over older substructure remains. The site note caught his attention. Existing annex foundation removed and soil stabilized prior to pour. Stabilized. Another word that could mean anything or nothing. He found the contractor name, Brennan and Holt Civil, out of county. Insurance records expired. One handwritten note clipped to a permit extension mentioned unexpected subsurface debris requiring additional labor and nighttime haul-off to keep schedule. Nighttime haul-off. Silas leaned closer. No itemized debris list attached. He checked whether it had been removed. There was a staple mark where another sheet should have been. Gone. He kept digging. Near the back of the file sat a geotechnical memo, copied poor and crooked, probably overlooked because it was boring. The engineer noted an anomaly under the east footing line. Mixed organic matter and voided pocket inconsistent with original structure footprint. Recommendation: over-excavate and recompact. Mixed organic matter. Voided pocket. Silas had read enough burial ground to know how engineers describe things they did not want to describe. Human remains, old timber, animal pits, rotted trash, anything inconvenient became organic matter. He closed his eyes a moment. Then he opened them and copied the memo number, date, and contractor note onto the back of a funeral invoice from his pocket. When he looked up, someone stood at the far end of the aisle. Mayor Robert Caskey. He wasn't dressed for office. Camel overcoat, polished shoes, scarf folded neat. He looked like a magazine ad for trustworthy wealth, except for the eyes. Those were still the same eyes from the Polaroid, light, amused, and mean when no one important was watching. "Well," Caskey said softly, "this is a surprise." Silas slid the file closed. Caskey walked closer, smiling like they'd met at church. "Martha told me she saw you down here. Said you looked real focused." He glanced at the box labels. Didn't know grave work called for building permits. "Town ground shifts. Thought I'd learn where from." The mayor put one hand in his coat pocket and looked around at the shelves as if admiring civic diligence. "You know, Silas, every town needs men like you. Steady hands, institutional memory, folks who don't panic over every old rumor that blows back up." Silas said nothing. Caskey's smile thinned. "Thing about memory, though, it's a dangerous servant if you let it run wild. People start stitching stories together from scraps. Hurt innocent reputations." "Innocent," Silas said. Caskey studied him a moment, then the warmth dropped out of his face. "You found something in that grave." Not a question. Silas could hear the fluorescent hum above them. Somewhere upstairs, a cart rolled over tile. The world beyond the aisle kept going like nothing important was happening. He met the mayor's gaze. Maybe the earth found it. I just happened to be holding the shovel. That landed. Caskey's jaw flexed once. Listen to me carefully, he said. You are standing in the middle of a town held together by trust, by institutions, by people believing in continuity. Men my age spent decades building that. One old box of mildew and gossip doesn't outweigh lives of service. Silas thought of Alice's diary, the tight slanted handwriting. I never did anything. Service, he repeated. Caskey stepped closer until there was only a narrow shelf between them. Do you know what happens when old accusations get loose now? The bank gets hit, property values drop, employers pull out, families panic. You don't just bruise 3 names, Silas. You poison a whole town. There it was, the old Clear Creek trick. Dress self-protection up as public duty. Silas's voice stayed quiet. Town got poisoned a long time ago. Caskey stared at him, then he smiled again, but this time it was all teeth. Let's be practical. You've put in a lifetime. Nobody doubts that. Cemetery pension's not much, though. I could change that. Quietly, call it a retirement appreciation package. More than enough to set you comfortable somewhere warm. Tennessee, maybe. Carolinas. You wouldn't have to lift another shovel. The offer hung between them like bad perfume. Silas almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable. Men like Caskey always believed everybody had a price. They'd lived too long buying silence wholesale. I ain't leaving, Silas said. Think on it. Already did. The mayor's eyes hardened. You should understand something. The past is not a clean thing. A lot of decent people made choices during ugly circumstances. Young people do reckless things. Sometimes accidents happen. Then grown men have to contain damage before it destroys everyone. Silas leaned in a fraction. Did you call burying her an accident too? Caskey's hand came out of his pocket, empty, but tense. Watch yourself. No, Silas said, you watch me. For the first time, a flicker of something real passed over the mayor's face. Not rage, fear. Because he heard it too, the difference in the voice. This was no drunk old man muttering over bar stools. No rumor, no grieving mother they could exhaust. This was a man who had spent his life with the dead and lost his fear of respectable faces. Caskey stepped back and smoothed his coat. You know what your problem is? He said. You think labor makes you moral. Silas shook his head. No, I think what you buried makes you guilty. The mayor stood still 1 beat longer, then gave a small shrug like he'd grown bored. Take the offer while it's still an offer. He turned and walked out of the aisle without another word. Silas waited until the sound of his shoes faded upstairs. Then he exhaled slowly through his nose. Not innocence, not confusion, not even a good liar's denial. Both Daughtry and Caskey had come with the same instinct. Contain, buy, warn. That meant the diary could hurt them. And that meant Alice had told the truth. He put the file back exactly where he found it, signed out, and left through the basement stairwell without stopping at the front desk. Outside, the sky had darkened to a lead color. The wind smelled like rain and cold stone. Town Hall stood across the lot with its white pillars and memorial wing gleaming pale and false. Silas sat in his truck and looked at the east side of that building. A memory nudged him from the edge of years. Construction back then. Night crews more than folks expected. Concrete trucks late. Talk at Merle's that Brennan and Holt were moving dirt off hours to stay on schedule. One mason saying they poured over a mess, and nobody ever explained what it was. Mixed organic matter. Voided pocket. Nighttime haul-off. His hands tightened on the wheel. Alice wasn't in a grave. Not a marked one, anyway. If the diary led to Mine Entrance Road, and the lockbox wound up under Section E, then the body had likely gone somewhere these men controlled later. Somewhere sealed, somewhere defended by official use, somewhere no one would ever think to search once the story calcified. Town Hall, the memorial wing itself, a monument built over a girl they erased. He drove back to the cemetery in hard silence. By the time he reached the old section, the first thin rain had begun, barely more than cold needles in the air. He parked by the fresh mound of Etta Corbin's grave and took the probing rod again. The place where he'd felt loose fill earlier waited under a spatter of wet leaves. He knelt and worked with the hand trowel, cutting a neat plug. Mud darkened under his nails. The smell rose up rich and old. He widened the hole carefully and followed the disturbed soil downward. 6 inches, 12. Then the trowel struck something small and hard. Not iron this time. He set the tool aside and used his fingers. A fragment of cloth came first, rotten and brown, then a thin strip of leather, then something pale under it that made him stop. Bone? No, not yet, just old shell button. He brushed farther and uncovered the edge of a narrow pit separate from any coffin line. Shallow, hastily cut, a secondary burial hole. His mouth went dry. He did not exhume more. Not yet. Rain was thickening, light was failing, and if he was right, he needed a witness eventually, a chain nobody could easily break. But this shallow hole told him what he needed. Someone had hidden things here besides the lockbox. Tokens, spillover, evidence too dangerous to keep close, too incriminating to destroy carelessly. A staging ground. He covered the hole again and stood in the drizzle, mud on his gloves, the old stones around him leaning like tired jurors. The cemetery looked almost blue in the dying light. Rain tapped on granite, water beaded on the fresh grave mound. Somewhere an iron gate clicked in the wind. Silas took off his cap. He had never been much for prayer. Too many funerals had cured him of neat speeches to heaven. But there in the old section, with damp earth under his boots and a dead girl's history opening at his feet, he spoke anyway. Not up, down. I don't know where all of you are, he said to the ground. Don't know what they did exact. But I'm done letting men with clean hands keep you buried wrong. Rain ran off the brim in cold lines down his face. I'll find what's left of her, he said, and I'll drag daylight over every name tied to it if it kills me. The wind moved through the oaks then, hard enough to scatter a spray of dead leaves over the graves. One hit his coat and stuck there wetly. Silas put his cap back on and walked to the truck. There was no turning aside now. Not after the records, not after the mayor's offer, not after the hole in the old section and the building plans and the look in Daughtry's eyes. The rot was not local, it was structural. Bank, law, land, town history itself all braced together around one old crime. And he, a cemetery man with mud on his boots and no power except persistence, had just set his shoulder against the whole rotten frame. The sedan was waiting when he got home. Black, long-bodied, polished even under rain. It sat at the mouth of his gravel drive with the engine running and the headlights off, like it belonged to the dark more than the road. Water slid over the hood in silver veins. Behind it, the woods rose black and wet. Silas did not stop his truck right away. He rolled past the first line of fence posts, cut the engine, and listened. Rain on the roof, tick of cooling metal, the sedan's soft idle steady as a held breath. He took in the details before moving. Driver visible? No. Second vehicle? None he could see. Porch light on? No. Front door shut? From here, yes. He slipped the folding knife from his pocket into the sleeve of his coat and stepped out. The rain had a hard edge now, cold enough to sting the back of his neck. Gravel shifted under his boots as he walked toward the house without acknowledging the sedan. Its tinted rear window lowered halfway. Evening, Silas, a voice said. Mayor Robert Caskey, of course. Silas kept walking. Thought maybe you'd want to save me the trip to the porch. That made Silas stop. Not because he felt courtesy, because he wanted the mayor where he could see him. Caskey opened the rear door and stepped out under a big black umbrella held by the driver. Camel coat again, polished shoes unsuited to gravel. He looked like a man arriving for a ribbon cutting, not a shakedown in the woods. Bad weather for social calls, Silas said. Some things shouldn't wait. Silas turned toward the house. The porch steps were wet. One board near the top had been slightly splintered inward. He saw it in one glance. Someone had been inside. The front door sat shut, but the latch plate was nicked bright. He climbed the steps, opened the door, and entered without hurry. The first wrongness was smell, not gas, not smoke. Strangers, wet wool, shoe leather, cheap cologne under his own cabin air of wood heat, radiator dust, and old coffee. He scanned the room, drawers closed but not right. A chair shifted an inch off its usual line. His late wife Ruth's photograph on the mantel crooked left. The cupboard where he kept flowers stood not fully latched. A mug on the sink had been moved to the opposite side. They had searched, professionally enough not to smash things, carelessly enough to insult him. Silas set his jaw and walked through every room. Bed pulled slightly from the wall, closet disturbed, under mattress shotgun still there, fireplace stone undisturbed. Good. He went out the back under the lean-to rain and checked the shed. The old infant casket sat exactly where he'd left it. He opened it. Flower tin still there. He did not touch it. Just closed the lid and stood in the smell of lacquer and damp pine, letting the relief pass through him without softening anything else. When he returned to the porch, Kasky was waiting beneath the umbrella, looking mildly offended by the weather. "You're either bold," Silas said, "or stupid." The driver looked at the mayor. Kasky dismissed him with a tiny tilt of the head. The umbrella went back to the sedan. The mayor stood in the rain now, letting it spot his coat, maybe to show he could. "We didn't take anything," Kasky said. "We? No point pretending." Silas leaned one shoulder to the porch post. Rain drummed on the tin roof above them. Breaking into a man's house usually means you're out of friendly conversation. Kasky clasped his hands loosely in front of him. "I'm trying to spare you ugliness." "Funny. Looks like ugliness found my front room first." The mayor exhaled through his nose. "You're making this harder than necessary." "That's new for you?" For a second, Kasky's mouth twitched. "You think you've stumbled into some grand moral drama, don't you? Old bones, old diary, old grievance, the kind of thing people in cities make documentaries about." Silas said nothing. Kasky's voice lowered. "Let me tell you the truth about small towns. They are fragile, every one of them. A single scandal, especially a historic one tied to men currently carrying civic responsibility, can collapse confidence overnight. Banks panic, businesses freeze, outsiders circle, lawyers feed, good people suffer. Good people already did. That girl, Alice," Kasky's eyes sharpened. "Alice made bad choices." The rain seemed to stop in Silas's ears, though it didn't stop falling. Slowly he stepped off the porch and came down into the yard until he stood level with the mayor. "What did you say?" Kasky held his ground. "You heard me. She got involved where she didn't understand the stakes." Silas's voice dropped to gravel. "She was a kid. She was not innocent." The slap of Silas's palm across Kasky's face cracked louder than the rain. The mayor staggered half a step, stunned less by force than by the fact of it. His cheek flared red under the wet. The driver lunged from the car, but Kasky threw a hand out to stop him. Silas stood still in the yard, breathing hard once through his nose. "Don't you put dirt on her again." Kasky touched his cheek with 2 fingers. When he looked up, the gentleman act had burned off entirely. The old boy in the Polaroid looked out now, entitled, humiliated, dangerous. "You old bastard." "Yeah," Silas said, and still upright. Rainwater ran off both of them. The driver, a thick man in a dark coat, hovered at the edge of the gravel waiting for permission. Kasky waved him back again and straightened. "Listen to me carefully," he said, voice thin with rage he was trying to leash. "I came here with generosity. I came here offering a path that leaves your name clean and your last years comfortable. You are not owed that." Silas looked at him as if studying rot under bark. Kasky went on. "There's a retirement fund waiting, enough to buy you a good house and private care till the day you die. It can be wired tomorrow. You leave Clear Creek. You keep your mouth shut. You hand over anything you found and this ends." "No. Think. No. You don't even know the whole story." "I know enough." The mayor's eyes moved to the house, the shed line, the dark woods beyond, calculating. "You live alone out here?" Silas did not answer. "No wife, no children nearby, no one checking on you regular except maybe cemetery staff." He let that settle. "Men alone in the country have accidents, falls, stove fires, heart attacks nobody catches till too late." Silas took one step closer. "Then you better make sure I die in public." That landed too. Caskey looked at him a long moment, rain sliding off his lashes. Then he nodded once as if a final piece had clicked into place. "All right," he said quietly. "Have it your way." He turned and went back to the sedan. Before getting in, he looked over the roof at Silas and said, "You always did mistake stubbornness for dignity." The car backed out and disappeared through the trees. Silas stood in the rain until the taillights were gone. Then he went inside, toweled the water from his face, and set the kitchen chair square again under the table. The house felt bruised. He righted Ruth's photograph and looked at it for a moment. She'd been dead 8 years now. Cancer. Fast. Merciless. She had possessed the kind of plain wisdom that cut through foolishness in one sentence. If she were here, she'd have told him 2 things. First, that he was in real danger. Second, that danger wasn't reason enough to back off if a dead girl had nobody else. "Yeah," he muttered to the photograph. "I know." He did not sit long. Instead, he began to prepare. He moved the diary from the casket shed to a different hiding place entirely, a rusted tool chest beneath the sacks of lime in the maintenance shack at the cemetery, a place nobody from town hall would think to search without getting dirty. He took only the Polaroid and 1 copied diary page with the names, sealed them in plastic, and slid them inside the lining of his coat. Then he drove back to town under dark rain and parked across from the all-night gas station where the payphone still stood under a cracked plexiglass hood. His cell service at the cabin came and went. The payphone, ugly and old, felt safer somehow. He fed in quarters and called information for the Charleston paper, then a smaller investigative weekly he remembered from years back. He asked for a reporter named Daniel Klein, someone who used to dig into mine safety fraud and county corruption. The paper operator said Klein had gone freelance but still answered messages on an office line. Silas wrote the number on his palm. He did not call yet. Too exposed, too easy to intercept if somebody already had eyes on him, and by now he assumed they did. But soon, very soon, the truth needed to get out of Clear Creek before Clear Creek closed its fist. On the drive back to the cemetery, he noticed headlights keeping distance 2 turns behind, not close enough to challenge, close enough to remind him. He made 3 unnecessary turns through side streets. The lights stayed with him through 2, lost him on the 3rd when he cut behind the Methodist church and killed his lamps until they passed. By the time he reached the cemetery maintenance shed, the rain had thinned to mist. He stood a long while under the awning, listening to the drip off gutters, smelling wet cedar and fresh-cut earth, and the metallic odor of tools. His body ached in old places. The slap to Caskey's face still hummed in his hand. He should have felt foolish. Instead, he felt steady. That surprised him a little. All his life, other men had held power by forcing everyone else into little humiliations, swallowed words, lowered eyes, polite lies. Maybe that was why the slap mattered. Not because it hurt the mayor, because it broke a ritual. For 1 clean second, Robert Caskey had not been Clear Creek's first citizen. He had been what he started as, a bully in expensive clothes. Silas locked the diary away, checked the shed twice, then went back to his truck. Before leaving, he walked once more to Section E in the old corner. Mist curled low between the stones. Night had thickened there so much the place seemed lit from nowhere. He stood by the spot where the lockbox had come up and looked over the dark ground. Somewhere in town, the men tied to Alice's last night were scrambling now, not worried about justice, worried about exposure. That made them sloppy. Fear always did. Silas put a hand on the wet handle of his shovel leaning against the truck bed. "You boys spent 40 years thinking time made you clean," he said softly. The cemetery gave back no answer, but the old section no longer felt asleep. It felt waiting. Silas went back before sunrise. He preferred the cemetery in first light, before cars on the county road, and before the world remembered its daily noise. The air carried every small sound then: the knock of a woodpecker, the wet slide of mud off a boot, the distant whistle from the rail line 2 towns over. The old section lay under a lid of white mist, the stones rising out of it like broken teeth. He brought a canvas evidence bag, a hand rake, soft brushes, a narrow trowel, and the kind of patience only age and labor could teach. He did not go first to the lockbox site. He went to the secondary disturbance he had marked the day before. The shallow pit. He knelt and began. This was no official excavation. No cameras, no floodlights, no men in windbreakers saying chain of custody every other breath. Just Silas, the damp earth, and 40 years of skill in reading disturbed soil. He worked slow enough to keep the layers honest. The upper ground came away loose. Rain-darkened leaves, thin rootlets, a scatter of pebbles. Beneath that sat the older fill, different in color from the undisturbed earth around it. Less packed, slightly ashy. Soil people had once moved in haste and tamped badly. His trowel hit cloth first, not much left of it. Brown threads fused with dirt. He brushed until a shape emerged beneath. Circular, metal. Silas held his breath and cleared the object carefully. A class ring. Rusted but intact enough to show its form. A heavy 1970s men's ring, rectangular face, school crest barely visible under corrosion. He rubbed the side with his thumb and saw lettering under the rust. CCHS Clear Creek High School. He turned it in the weak light. Inside the band, initials were still legible. E.M. Elias Mercer. Silas sat back on his heels. The richest landowner in town had once lost his class ring in a shallow hidden pit in the cemetery's old section, where a dead girl's lockbox also lay buried below legal depth. That was not coincidence. It was panic made physical. A drop. A mistake. The kind men committed when young and drunk and certain servants would clean behind them. He slipped the ring into the evidence bag. Then he kept going. A few inches deeper, his brush touched pale material that gave a dry, delicate resistance. Bone. He did not need a doctor for that. Years in cemeteries taught a man enough to know human from root, fragment from stone. These were small fragments. Partial, broken, weathered by soil and time. Not a whole burial, scatter from a transfer, spill from a moved body, or remains removed from one place and hidden in another while bigger work happened elsewhere. He found 3 pieces in all before stopping. A sliver of ulna perhaps, part of rib, and one small fragment that might have been from the hand. No coffin hardware, no casket wood, no formal interment, just concealment. Silas bagged them separately, labeled them with pencil on masking tape, and sat motionless for a long time. The old section had become a whispering witness. Not the grave, not Alice entire, but a trail, a lockbox, Mercer's ring, human fragments. The boys had come here after the fact, likely to stash what tied them to her or what they could not keep elsewhere. The cemetery's forgotten corner offered secrecy, and rich young men had always assumed poor ground workers didn't matter enough to notice. They had been right then, not now. He covered the excavation with care, tamped the soil lightly, scattered leaves back over it, and carried the evidence bag to the truck. The sun was trying to rise behind the cloud when he leaned against the tailgate and let his mind run the line through. Alice lured to Mine Entrance Road. Something happened there. Rape, assault, murder, maybe all tangled. Items hidden in Section E, lockbox, ring, fragments. Years later, or maybe soon after, the body likely moved and sealed under what became Town Hall's memorial wing. He looked toward town beyond the tree line. That building sat on stabilized ground, mixed organic matter, voided pocket, nighttime haul-off. His certainty settled heavy and clean. Alice Vance wasn't in a grave. She was under public brick and polished marble, under speeches and plaques and civic dinners, buried in the foundation of the town's respectability. The thought made his stomach burn. Around 9, he left the cemetery and drove to the county medical examiner's satellite office, 40 miles out. Not with the bones, he wasn't ready to surrender the only physical evidence he had to a system still touching Daughtry's reach, but with a question. A technician he knew from old burial permit work, a thin man named Gerald with nicotine fingers and decent instincts, met him in the parking lot on smoke break. "You look rough, Silas." "Need to know something," Silas said. "Hypothetical." Gerald laughed once. "Those are always good. If old remains were under a building foundation, poured over concrete years back, you had reason to suspect. What would show it?" Gerald frowned through cigarette smoke. "Depends how much was left. Ground-penetrating radar, maybe. Core sampling. If construction disturbed it, You might get mixed fragments and fill. Why? Silas ignored the last part. If somebody moved a body once before burying it under there, then you'd see inconsistent deposition, different soil types on remains, missing articulation, maybe secondary dump pockets. Gerald squinted. You asking because somebody actually found something? Silas looked at him a beat too long. Gerald's cigarette lowered. Jesus, you are. Silas shook his head. I didn't say that. No, but your face did. Gerald glanced around the lot, then lowered his voice. Listen, if you're anywhere near serious, don't hand local law the first thing you've got. Not unless you trust the chain. Take photos, dates, keep notes, get an outside reporter or state bureau involved first. Silas nodded once. Gerald hesitated. This about that old missing girl? What was her name? Silas didn't answer. Gerald did not ask again. You didn't hear any of this from me. On the drive back, Silas stopped at a hardware store 2 towns over and bought a disposable camera, permanent marker, evidence envelopes, and a small pry bar. Not because he intended to go under town hall with a crowbar like some fool in a movie, because if the chance opened, he meant to be ready. By noon, he was back in Clear Creek, circling the square. Town hall looked innocent as a wedding cake in the brightening day. Workers were already hanging bunting for the centennial celebration. 2 women in volunteer badges arranged fake flowers by the memorial wing entrance. A local TV van from Beckley parked at the curb, likely there to shoot feel-good footage about heritage and community investment. Silas watched through the windshield and felt something like contempt settle in him, cold and durable. The building wore memory as decoration, while actual memory lay sealed under its floor. He drove on to the cemetery shop and hid the evidence deeper, in a locked steel case behind bags of fertilizer where only he knew the false panel gave access. He took photographs of the ring and bone fragments against a ruler. Then he wrote everything in a lined notebook. Time, place, depth, soil character, initials, weather, his observations. Every detail, every smell, every thought he trusted enough to preserve. He had never been a man of paperwork, but he knew this much. Truth without record gets argued to death. By late afternoon, a call came into the cemetery office. Bev stuck her head into the maintenance bay where Silas was pretending to service a leaf blower. Man on the line asking for you, says he's from the Gazette in Charleston. Silas straightened slowly. Name? Daniel Klein. Good. He took the phone in the back room and kept his voice low. Klein, pause, city sounds behind the line. Horn, office murmur. This is Daniel Klein. I got a message from a payphone last night saying a 40-year-old disappearance in Clear Creek might tie to current office holders. That's your message? It is. Who am I speaking with? Name don't matter yet. It does if I'm risking libel. Silas looked through the office window at the cemetery stretching away in rows of stone. Girl named Alice Vance. Missing 1976. Official story said runaway. I've got material evidence suggesting otherwise. Names in writing, physical items, possible burial concealment under public property. Klein went quiet the way good reporters do when they've stopped performing and started listening. Current office holders? Yes. You safe? Silas glanced at the doorway. No. Can you meet? Maybe. Klein said, I'm in Beckley through tonight on another story. Closest I can get fast. There's an abandoned mill road off Route 9 halfway between there and you. Used to service the old paper plant. You know it? Silas did. Too well, maybe. The mill had been dead 15 years. Windows punched out. Catwalks rusting. Young men sometimes drank there. Nobody decent used it for meetings. Silas's hand tightened on the phone. How'd you pick that place? Neutral ground, Klein said. Public, enough nobody in your town sees us together. Remote enough we can talk. Silas did not answer right away. Something in the arrangement sat wrong. Maybe only because everything sat wrong now. Klein spoke again. I can also meet farther out, but I'm on deadline. Evening's best. 7? Silas looked at the calendar pinned by the desk. Too fast to verify. Too exposed to decline. All right, he said finally. 7. When he hung up, he stood a long time listening to the dial tone hum out. Then he replaced the receiver and went back to the maintenance bay. Bev looked up from her desk. Everything okay? Silas met her eyes. Bev had worked there 20 years, lost a son to pills, and spoke less than most. There was decent steel in her, but he did not want to burden her with knowledge she couldn't safely hold. Just business, he said. She studied him like she didn't believe it, then let it pass. At dusk, Silas made his preparations. He did not take the diary. He took copies of 2 pages, the Polaroid sealed in plastic, a photograph of Mercer's ring, and 1 bone fragment envelope. Enough to prove, not enough to lose everything at once. He put them inside a canvas satchel and slung it under his coat. Then he loaded his truck with tools he might plausibly have him back on any day: shovel, chain, pry bar, work light, rope. No gun. Guns changed stories fast, and Silas had no intention of becoming the kind of headline men like Caskey could use. As he pulled out from the cemetery, he caught movement by the old sycamore near the gate. A patrol car, engine off, just parked there, watching. Silas drove on without turning his head. The town was tightening, and somewhere ahead, whether through bad luck or betrayal, the road was leading him toward a trap. The road to the old mill left Route 9 like a thought nobody should have followed. Cracked asphalt narrowed to broken gravel, then to a lane eaten up by weeds and ruts. Pine leaned in on both sides. The last half mile dipped through a hollow where the air turned colder and the shadows came early. By the time Silas saw the mill's outline through the trees, daylight had thinned to iron gray. The place had once turned timber into pulp and paychecks. Now it stood dead and skeletal above the creek. Corrugated metal walls streaked orange with rust, windows busted blind, conveyors frozen in place like the carcass of some big machine animal. Wind moved through it with a deep, hollow moan. Silas parked 30 yards short of the loading dock and killed the engine. No other vehicle visible. No human movement. No reporter. He sat with both hands on the wheel and listened. The ticking of his truck, the creak below, a loose sheet of metal banging slow somewhere overhead. Something was wrong. He reached under the seat, took the flashlight, but did not turn it on, and stepped out with the satchel still under his coat. Cold hit him first, not sharp but raw and damp, carrying the smell of wet leaves, old oil, and rusted water. The ground underfoot was a mix of gravel and black mud. His boots sank half an inch with every step. "Klein," he called. Only the mill answered, its empty guts passing the name around and handing it back warped. Silas did not walk straight to the main entrance. He angled left, keeping the loading dock pillars between himself and the open yard. He'd spent enough years around funeral warehouses and old industrial spaces to read bad footing and blind corners. At the edge of the dock, he stopped. Fresh tire tracks, more than one vehicle, mud still wet in the grooves. He looked up. A shape shifted in a second-story window, then another. Silas's jaw locked. Not a meeting, an ambush. He moved fast for a man his age, one hard step back into the shoddy of the dock support just as headlights flared behind him. 2 trucks rolled in from the road and cut off his exit, engines growling. Doors opened, boots hit mud. Young men, 4, maybe 5. No uniforms, work jackets, ball caps, confidence louder than caution. One voice he recognized before he saw the face. "Evening, old man." Mayor Caskey's son, Wade. Late 30s, thick in the chest, gym-built but soft at the corners, with the flush skin and entitled jaw of a man who'd never had to pay full price for his own mistakes. He stepped into the wash of his truck's lights with a tire iron hanging loose in one hand, like he hoped it looked casual. 2 others spread right. One climbed the dock steps. Another circled wide toward the creekside. Silas stood still in the dark near the support post. Wade smiled when he found him. "You really came." "Guess you really lied," Silas said. Wade laughed. "You act surprised." The men around him chuckled too, but not comfortably. They were hired hands, or friends of the son, or both. Younger than Silas by 20 years minimum. Strong, careless, eager for the ugly thing to begin. Wade nodded toward Silas's coat. "You got the diary?" "No." "Don't make this difficult." Silas looked at the tire iron, the trucks, the men trying to box him in. "Looks like difficult got here first." One of the others spat into the mud. "Why don't you just hand it over? Ain't your fight." Silas turned his head slightly and saw the upper window again. One more silhouette there. Spotter. Good. Count 6 total. Wade stepped closer. My father said he tried to handle this respectful. Said you used to understand how the world works. Guess old age makes some men stupid. Or tired of being scared. Wade's smile thinned. You think anybody's going to care what some gravedigger says? Some old pages from a dead girl in a story nobody can prove? Silas said nothing. Wade came another step. Here's the truth. Folks like you always get confused. You touch something too big for you, and then you start imagining you matter. There it was again. Family inheritance, passed down clean as silverware. The certainty that laboring men existed beneath the story, never in it. Silas looked past Wade into the dark mill entrance. Conveyor shadows, broken railings, a hanging chain, sagged flooring where rain had gotten in for years. He read the building in one sweep. Weak spots, narrow catwalk, blind lanes, good places to vanish, better places to make younger men hurt themselves. He'd never fought for sport in his life, but he had spent decades moving weight, reading dangerous ground, surviving around heavy equipment in open holes. Strength was not his edge anymore. Judgment was. Wade mistook his silence for surrender. Bag, he said, holding out his free. I'm in. Silas slowly reached inside his coat. 3 of the men leaned in. He pulled out not the satchel, but the small evidence envelope, holding one bone fragment. He held it up between thumb and forefinger in the truck lights. Wade's expression changed. The men around him looked closer without understanding. That, Silas said, came out of your daddy's past this morning. Wade's jaw tightened. Give it here. Silas closed his fist around the envelope. Nah. Wade's face flushed dark. Take him. 2 men rushed at once. Silas moved sideways into the loading dock, shadowed just as the first one swung. The punch glanced off the post. The second lunged low and caught only Silas's coat. Silas drove the flashlight hard into the man's nose with a dull crunch and heard him yelp. Then Silas ran, not away from the mill, into it. He hit the dock stairs, boots slamming metal, and cut through the torn doorway into darkness smelling of mold, machine grease, and old dust. Behind him came curses, pounding steps, Wade shouting, "Don't let him get upstairs!" Silas killed his flashlight completely. Darkness swallowed the interior. Only thin bars of truck light leaked through broken panels, striping the floor in silver gray. Huge dead machines loomed around him. Rollers, conveyors, vats, piping. The floor trembled faintly under rushing feet behind him. Good. Let them chase. He knew enough already. The center aisle had rotted through in spots where roof leaks had worked for years. The catwalk above had missing sections. The chain hoist to the left still hung from an overhead track. He'd seen all that in the first glance. Younger men never believed old eyes could take in that much that fast. A boot scraped close behind. Silas ducked between 2 machines and flattened himself against cold steel as one pursuer ran past cursing. Another came slower, flashlight beam jerking wildly. There, somebody shouted from above. So the spotter had moved to the interior level. Silas picked up a fist-sized bolt from the floor and threw it into the far darkness. It clanged off a vat. 2 lights swung that way immediately. He went the opposite direction, slipping along a narrow service lane toward the old hoist area. Wade's voice echoed huge in the mill. Break him if you have to, just get the bow. Silas's breathing stayed steady, but his knee had started speaking up now, sharp, hot complaint under the kneecap from the stair sprint. He ignored it. Pain was information, not command. He reached the hoist platform and found what he'd hoped. A length of chain coiled on the floor, heavy but movable. One end still hooked to the hanging block. He set it quick across a low passage at shin height and stepped back into shadow. The first man hit it at a run. He went down hard, flashlight flying, shoulder smashing the concrete with a sound like dropped lumber. Silas was on him before the man could suck in breath. One boot pinned the wrist, both hands on the chain, a fast twist across the forearm and neck. Not choking, just controlling. Hurting, the younger man gasped and lost whatever fight he thought he had. Stay down, Silas said. Then he took the man's flashlight and moved. A second pursuer came around the machine bank, swinging a length of pipe. Silas flashed the light straight into his eyes, blinding him for half a second. then shoved a rolling tool cart hard with both hands. The cart slammed the man at the knees. He toppled backward through rotten boards at the aisle edge and dropped waist deep into a lower pit with a scream of surprise. Not dead, just trapped and hurt. Silas kept going. Above him, metal groaned as the spotter crossed the catwalk. Wade shouted, "Up top! He's heading up top!" No, he wasn't, but let them believe it. He circled under the stairs and climbed halfway, enough to draw noise, then doubled back through a maintenance hatch hanging off one hinge. The hatch opened into a side chamber lined with old electrical cabinets and dust thick as felt. One bare bulb dangled dead from the ceiling. Silas crouched there, listening. He could hear them spreading out wrong. Too fast, too angry. One of the hired men yelled, "Floor's bad over here!" Wade cursed him to move anyway. Silas almost pitied them. Then he remembered Alice's diary. Tom laughed, said nobody listens to girls who flirt, then cry. The pity dried up. He eased from the chamber and made for the stair base again, just as Wade himself came down the center aisle, tire iron ready, breathing hard. The mayor's son looked less polished in the dark, sweat on his upper lip, mud up the cuffs, eyes shiny with adrenaline and insult. He saw Silas and grinned, relieved to finally have the old man in front of him. Done running? Silas stood in the thin light from a roof gap, shoulders low, shovel-calloused hands open. "Done underestimating," he said. Wade charged. The tire irons swung wide and mean. Silas stepped inside it, took the blow partly on his left forearm with a thud that lit his bones on fire, and rammed the flashlight into Wade's throat. Wade gagged, stumbled back. Silas grabbed a hanging chain with both hands, yanked it loose, and the suspended hook block dropped from above with a shrieking burst of rust. It slammed the floor between Wade's feet. Concrete cracked. Wade jumped sideways in panic and landed on the edge of a rotten panel. The wood gave under one boot. His leg plunged through to the thigh. He screamed and dropped the tire iron. Before he could wrench free, Silas was there, one hand on Wade's coat collar, one forearm across his chest, holding him down over the brake. Wade thrashed. "Get off me!" Silas leaned close enough for the man to smell grave dirt in his clothes. "You boys always thought the world would hold your weight." A hired hand ran in from the left. Silas seized the tire iron from the floor and swung once, not at the man's head, but at the steel railing beside him. Sparks jumped. The sound in that dark chamber was huge, violent, enough to make the man flinch and stop cold. "Next one comes near me," Silas said, voice low and deadly calm. I let him drag Wade the rest of the way through that floor. The man halted. So did the others, gathering now in a ragged half circle just beyond the weak patch. Wade's face had gone white with pain and fear. He tried to keep the old sneer and couldn't hold it. "You're dead for this." Silas looked at him and saw a child of impunity finally touching consequence with one leg. "No," he said, "but your family name might be." Somewhere beyond the broken windows, a siren wailed in the distance. Not close yet. Maybe real. Maybe not for them. But the sound unsettled the room. Good. Silas let Wade's collar go with a shove and backed into the shadows, tire iron in one hand, flashlight in the other, the satchel still hidden under his coat. Nobody rushed him again. He disappeared through the machinery and out a side exit into the wet night before their nerve came back. Behind him, in the belly of the dead mill, the mayor's son screamed for somebody to get him loose. Rain had started again by the time Silas reached the truck. Not a hard rain, a cold, needling one that stitched silver lines through the dark and made the gravel shine. He got in, locked the doors, and sat bent over the wheel, breathing through the burn in his left forearm. The tire iron blow had already raised a knot beneath the sleeve. His knee throbbed, his shoulder barked from wrenching the chain loose. But he was alive, and he still had the evidence. From inside the mill came faint shouting, swallowed by rust and distance. No one chased him immediately. They were too busy getting Wade out of the floor and deciding how to explain what had just happened. Silas started the truck, rolled without lights until he hit the tree line, then turned onto the road and headed not back to town but south, away from Clear Creek altogether. He drove 20 miles to a truck stop near the interstate and parked under harsh canopy lights beside idling semis. Diesel exhaust hung heavy. Men in reflective vests moved in and out of the diner. No place in the world felt less like a hunting ground for local power. Inside the restroom, he stripped off his coat and looked at the arm in the mirror. Swelling, purple already. Not broken, he thought. The skin on his knuckles had split too. Blood crusted there black under fluorescent light. He washed up slow. Cold water. Paper towels. The face in the mirror looked older now than it had that morning. Beard damp and rough. Eyes bloodshot. A shallow cut over one cheekbone he hadn't noticed until it stung. Men in their 20s recovered from violence like weather. Men in their 60s carried it in every joint by morning. A younger version of himself might have mistaken that for weakness. The older one knew better. Pain clarified, stripped away everything theatrical, left only purpose. He bought coffee, a boiled egg, and a first aid kit from the counter and took them to a back booth. The waitress eyed his bruises, then his hands, then said nothing. Good waitress. Silas wrapped the forearm himself and ate in small, deliberate bites. Outside, a truck air brake sighed long and low. Then he took out the payphone number on his palm and found another phone at the far end of the diner hall. This time when Daniel Klein answered, Silas did not waste words. You set me up? A pause, then, what? You told me to meet at the mill. They were waiting. Klein's voice sharpened. Jesus Christ, no. I'm in Beckley. I can prove it. I never left the county courthouse until 20 minutes ago. Who was there? Mayor's boy and 5 more. Then your lines burned or my message got intercepted. Silas believed him. Panic on the reporter's end had the right texture, not polished enough to be false. You still want this story? Silas asked. I want it more, but not by getting you killed. Can you move? I'm moving. Then listen carefully. Don't come to my office. Don't use local lines again. And don't trust anybody tied to county government. I've got a contact with the State Bureau and a forensic anthropologist at Marshall who owes me a favor. If your evidence is real, we go over their heads. You need to get me copies. Can do tomorrow. Where are you? Silas looked through the diner window at the wash of truck stop lights and did not answer. Fine, Klein said. Safer if I don't know. Call me from a public line afternoon tomorrow. Different town. I'll be ready. Silas hung up. When he sat back down, his coffee had gone lukewarm. He drank it anyway. The waitress refilled without asking. You get in a wreck? No, miss. She nodded like she knew better than to push. Silas left cash on the table and drove back toward Clear Creek close to midnight, keeping off main roads where he could. His body wanted bed, warmth, stillness. He gave it none of those things. At the cemetery, he parked in darkness behind the maintenance shed and went straight to the steel case. Evidence secure. Good. Then he sat on an upturned bucket among rakes and fertilizer bags and thought. The mill had changed things. Until now, Caskey and Daughtry had tried pressure, money, warnings. Tonight, they sent younger men to break him and take the diary. That meant panic had outrun strategy. It also meant they would escalate again. So would he. He spread the copied diary pages, the Polaroid, photos of the ring, and the notes from the town hall permit file on the workbench under a single bulb. Piece by piece, the story lay there in rough order, ugly and incomplete, but strong. Al Luss named the 3 boys. The Polaroid put her with them on July 18th. The newspaper proved Law knew about Mine Entrance Road almost immediately. The empty file showed cleanup. The cemetery note restricting Section E tied Daughtry to that area. Mercer's class ring and the bone fragments tied the old section to physical concealment. The engineering memo tied Town Hall's memorial wing to suspicious subsurface remains. Enough to force a real investigation, if he could get it public before the town sealed over it again. Silas looked around the shed. Shovels leaned in the corner. Chains hung from pegs. Pry bars, pulley rig, sledge, work light, hand auger, tools of burial, maintenance, and, wait, the tools of a lifetime. He thought about how close Wade had come in that mill, how none of them really expected resistance, not from him. Age had made him invisible to them except as a nuisance. That invisibility was a weapon if used right. The showdown at the mill was done, but the larger fight was not physical. It was about who got to set the stage for truth. He rubbed his bruised arm and made the decision. He would not slink evidence to a reporter and hope the story landed someday. He would drag it into the center of Clear Creek himself, public, and in front of cameras, in front of the very men who buried it. The centennial celebration at Town Hall would give him exactly what the dead rarely received in places like this: witnesses. The idea settled in him with frightening simplicity. Saturday, 6 p.m., Mayor Caskey on stage, Daughtry nearby, Mercer close, local TV rolling. Donors, churchwomen, veterans, school kids, all the respectable faces packed under one roof. He would walk in dirty if he had to and lay Alice at their feet. But he needed one more thing before that: enough physical certainty to make denial costly. By dawn, he was back in the truck with the hand auger and a narrow masonry bit. Town Hall's memorial wing opened to the public at 8 for volunteer decorators. The basement maintenance entrance, however, was usually unlocked earlier for heating checks and janitorial staff. Silas knew because he'd buried one of the janitor's wives and heard all manner of building complaints over the years. He parked 2 blocks away and came on foot through the alley side while the sky still held that blue-black color just before morning. The town was hushed, only one bakery light on, a newspaper truck rumbling far off. The memorial wing's basement access sat behind a hedge line near the east wall. Metal door, push bar, no alarm box visible outside. Silas tried it, unlocked. Inside smelled of bleach, old concrete, and warm pipes. He moved quietly through the service corridor, boots barely scuffing. Furnace room to the left, electrical closet, storage. Then the underside of the memorial wing, crawl height access beyond a maintenance panel where plumbing lines ran beneath the polished hall floor. He knelt and shined his flashlight through. Compacted fill, concrete piers, dust, narrow enough to force crawling. Silas swallowed once, then went in. The space pressed cold around him. Pipe hangers scraped his back. Dust got into his nose and throat. He dragged the hand auger behind him a few feet at a time until he reached the approximate east footing line from the plans. There he stopped and studied the ground in the flashlight beam. Most fill looked uniform, crushed stone and compacted dirt. But one section under the central hall had a different texture, darker and finer, as if older material had been turned and repacked before the slab pour. Mixed organic matter. He set the hand auger and turned it into the soil between 2 support points, slow and careful, a few inches at a time. Dust fell, the bit deeper. At maybe 20 inches, resistance changed, softer. Then, a smell, faint even after years, mineral, sweet, ancient decay trapped in sealed earth and disturbed at last. Silas froze. He drew the auger up. Dark soil clung to the spiral, threaded with something pale and fibrous. He brushed it with his finger. Not root. Bone residue. Textile. He could not be sure. He bagged the sample. Then he moved 2 feet over and drilled again. This time the auger struck something hard at shallow depth beneath fill. Not stone, hollower. He cleaned the bit and eased in the camera flash from the disposable through the small bore opening. One photo, another, not enough to see clearly, but enough that when his flashlight hit the hole at an angle, he caught the curved white edge of something unmistakable. A cranial dome, human skull, buried under the memorial wing floor. Silas shut his eyes for just 1 second, not because he doubted now, because the dead girl had been lying here all these years under speeches, plaques, and catered shrimp trays, while the men who put her there shook hands above her. He took 3 more photographs, marked the location in his notebook against the structural pier numbers, then backed out of the crawl space with dust in his beard and rage sitting heavy and calm in his chest. By the time volunteers began arriving upstairs, Silas was 2 blocks away, walking toward his truck with a janitor's quiet in his step and the truth sealed in envelopes under his coat. He did not feel triumphant. He felt old enough to understand that justice rarely arrived as a clean cavalry charge. More often it came like this, through bruised hands, bad knees, and stubborn men who refused to leave the dead where power had dumped them. At the cemetery shop, he laid all the evidence out once more. Locket, Polaroid, copied diary pages, Mercer's ring, bone fragments from Section E, soil sample from beneath Town Hall, photos from the crawl space. He looked at them the way a carpenter looks at tools before a hard job. On Saturday evening, he would carry these into the brightest room in Clear Creek, and if they tried to stop him, they'd have to do it under lights. Saturday evening came dressed in flags. Clear Creek had gone all in on its own reflection. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the town hall railings. Strings of warm bulbs crisscrossed the square. A brass quartet from the high school played patriotic standards off-key beneath a gazebo. Church ladies in press coats carried trays of cookies into the memorial wing. Men in county jackets shook hands under cameras. Children darted around the fountain with paper flags, bored and sugared. The centennial celebrations smelled like coffee urn steam, perfume, wool coats, damp brick, and fryer grease from the food truck parked by the curb. At 6 sharp, every important face in town was there. Mayor Robert Caskey worked the entrance with his polished public smile restored, though one cheek still held a faint yellowing line under makeup if you knew where to look. Police Chief Thomas Daughtry stood near the podium inside, uniform crisp, one hand resting near his belt, scanning the room the way men do when they believe vigilance itself is virtue. Elias Mercer stood by the donor plaque in a charcoal suit, tanned and silver-haired, his smile small and expensive. The sons of the soil, older, richer, still standing on what they stole. Silas arrived on foot from the alley side. He wore his brown canvas coat, clean but old, hat low, boots scrubbed as best he could. His left forearm was wrapped under the sleeve. The canvas satchel hung at his side. He looked like what he was, a cemetery man off shift, another invisible laborer drifting in at the edge of town ceremony. No one stopped him at the door. Inside the memorial wing, heat rolled over him. The room shone with recent polish, marble floor, framed black and white photographs of Clear Creek's heritage, a bronze plaque listing donors, folding chairs arranged before a podium draped in the flag, rows full, business owners, retired teachers, deputies' wives, old mine men, school board people, local press, and a camera crew from Beckley setting up near the rear. Silas stood at the back and let his eyes adjust. Above them hung recessed lights bright enough to make everyone look cleaner than they were. Beneath those lights, through the floor he had crawled under that morning, Alice lay in darkness. The thought steadied him. Mayor Caskey stepped to the podium at 6:10 to applause. "Friends, neighbors," he began, voice smooth and warm. "Tonight we celebrate 100 years of Clear Creek, our resilience, our values, and the people who built this town with courage and faith." Applause again. Silas stood very still. Caskey went on in the practiced cadence of men who've spent a lifetime laundering power through sentiment. He spoke of miners and teachers, churches and veterans, floods weathered, industries lost, a community bound by truth, decency, and hard work. Truth. The word hit Silas like a nail in the teeth. Daughtry stood off to one side of the room, Mercer near the front row. Both calm, maybe too calm. Either they thought the mill had scared Silas off, or they believed they still controlled the room enough to contain anything. Caskey shifted toward the donor plaque remarks, and this memorial wing stands as a testament to our commitment to honoring the past. Silas started walking, not fast, not dramatic, just straight down the center aisle, boots striking marble with a flat workman sound that did not belong among speeches. At first only a few heads turned, then more. Caskey's voice faltered half a beat. Daughtry's posture changed instantly. Silas kept going until he reached the open space before the podium. Then he climbed the 2 steps to the stage. Gasps moved through the room in a dry wave. "Sir," one volunteer whispered from the side. "You can't." Silas set the satchel on the podium and looked out over the crowd. The room had gone still enough to hear the camera operator adjust focus. Caskey stepped forward with that public smile fraying at the edges. "Silas, now's not the time." Silas took the microphone from its stand. His voice came out rough, unpolished, and big enough. "No," he said, "it's exactly the time." The speakers carried it clean through the room. Daughtry took one step toward the stage. "Put the mic down." Silas looked at him. "You come one step closer and I'll start with what's under this floor." That stopped him. People shifted in their seats. Murmurs rose. Mercer's face, usually composed as stone, tightened almost invisibly around the eyes. Silas opened the satchel. He did not rush. That was important. Let them see each item. Let the room learn how to look. First, the locket. It landed on the podium with a small metallic click that sounded loud in the silence. Then the Polaroid sealed in plastic. Then photocopied diary pages. Then the evidence envelope with Mercer's class ring. Then the separate envelopes of bone fragments. Then the photographs from the crawl space, each laid out under bright lights, plain as dishes on a kitchen table. Caskey found his politician's voice again. "Folks, we seem to have a misunderstanding." "No," Silas said into the microphone. "What we got is a girl the town let rich boys bury." The room broke open in noise. "What? Who's he talking about?" "Oh, my lord." Caskey reached for the microphone. Silas moved it away without looking at him. "Her name was Alice Vance," Silas said. That landed. Older faces in the room reacted first. A flinch, a blink. Memory tugged awake. "She vanished in 1976, Silas went on. Sheriff's office said runaway. Town said restless. Folks let the story stand because the boys tied to her had the right last names. He held up the copied diary page. She wrote these names before she disappeared. He read them one by one. Robert Caskey, Thomas Daughtry, Elias Mercer. The room seemed to inhale and forget to exhale. Mercer stood from the front row so quickly his chair scraped. "This is outrageous." Silas looked straight at him. "Your class ring says otherwise." He held up the evidence envelope. Camera flashes popped from the rear. Mercer's face lost color. Caskey stepped close, voice low and furious off mic. "You senile fool." Silas turned the microphone slightly and said, for the whole room to hear, "Mayor just called me senile." A ripple moved through the audience, some nervous, some ugly, but now everybody was listening. Daughtry signaled to two deputies near the door. Silas lifted one of the crawlspace photos. "You have me arrested before state investigators see these, Chief. And every camera in this room gets to ask why there's a human skull under your memorial wing." The deputies stopped. Even the Beckley crew, sensing blood under the civic frosting, pushed closer. Silas laid the photograph flat on the podium and spoke with that same graveyard plainness, the voice of a man who had no use for rhetoric because dirt never needed convincing. "I found a lockbox buried under the legal depth in Section E of Clear Creek Cemetery. Inside was Alice's locket, her diary, and a Polaroid showing her with these three men the night she vanished." He tapped the page. Her own words say they hounded her, threatened her, told her to meet by Mine Entrance Road if she wanted it to stop. He lifted the old newspaper clipping. 4 days later, Law searched Mine Entrance Road and told the paper there were no significant findings, yet somehow her file in the records room is empty. Clean empty. Now the crowd had gone beyond murmurs. People were whispering hard, turning to each other, trying to reconcile familiar public men with a dead girl's name they hadn't said in decades. In the second row, an old woman put a hand over her mouth and whispered, "Martha Vance's girl." Silas nodded toward the floor. "This morning I crawled under this wing with a hand auger and camera. There are remains under this building, human remains." Caskey snapped, "That's a lie!" Silas picked up the microphone with both hands. "Then let state forensic teams prove me wrong." Silence. Pure silence, because that was the one challenge innocent men met eagerly. Caskey did not speak. Neither did Daughtry. Neither did Mercer. And in that silence, the room understood more than words could have forced. A man from the back, one of the old mine retirees, shoulders bent with age, stood up. "Tom," he said, not Chief now, just Tom. "Is this true?" Daughtry looked at him with a face carved rigid. "Sit down, Harold." Harold did not sit. A woman near the aisle said, "I remember that girl. They said she ran off," another voice. "Why would her things be in a grave?" Then louder, "Why's there bones on that podium?" The moral weather of the room changed all at once. That was what Silas had come for. Not proof alone. Witnesses crossing the line from polite doubt into collective seeing. Once a crowd truly saw, power got slippery. The Beckley reporter pushed to the front. "Mayor Caskey, Chief Daughtry, will you consent to an immediate search of the memorial wing?" No answer. Mr. Mercer, can you explain how your class ring was recovered from a concealed pit tied to the disappearance of Alice Vance? Mercer's mouth opened and shut once. Silas took the Polaroid and held it high. The room could see it on the camera monitor now. Alice in the yellow blouse, arm gripped, the three young men around her in expensive suits. Somebody near the rear whispered, "Dear God." Caskey lunged then, sudden and stupid, reaching for the photo. Silas pulled back, but the movement was enough. Enough for everybody to see the mayor not as guardian of civic values, but as a man desperate to get his hands on evidence. Two gasps. One shouted curse. Daughtry barked, "Stand down!" at him too late. The mask was off. A state trooper's voice cut through from the entrance. No one touch anything. Heads turned. Daniel Klein stood there in a wet coat with two state investigators behind him and one uniformed trooper at their shoulder. Fast. Faster than Silas expected. Klein must have gambled and driven hard the moment he got the midday call. Relief did not flood Silas. He was too tired for flooding. It arrived like a small door opening in a locked room. Klein came straight down the aisle, notebook already out. "Mr. Boone, please step back from the podium and keep all materials visible." Daughtry drew himself up. "This is a municipal event, and you do not have jurisdiction to barge in." One of the investigators, a woman in a dark field jacket, cut him clean. "We have enough to secure the scene pending warrant execution, especially if local law is potentially implicated." The room erupted again. Phones came up everywhere now. Old women, bankers' wives, teenage volunteers, local news, everyone filming. Mercer moved toward a side exit. The trooper blocked him. "Sir, stay in the room." He stopped. Caskey looked around once at all the faces no longer arranged in deference. No applause, no trust, just hunger, fear, revulsion. Silas watched that moment settle on him like wet ash. For the first time in his life, Robert Caskey looked like a man whose name might not save him. Silas stepped back from the podium. His arm hurt. His knees hurt. A line of dried blood pulled tight on his cheek when he blinked. But his voice had done what a shovel and a diary and a conscience finally made possible. He had forced the town to look. And once Clear Creek saw the ghost it had helped bury, there was no putting the dirt back smooth again. Spring came late to Clear Creek that year, but when it came all at once. The fog still visited the low places in the mornings, but it no longer seemed like something crouched there to keep secrets. Sun broke through earlier. The oaks put out tender green. Water in the creek ran high and bright over stone. Folks opened windows again. Somewhere in town, someone finally painted over the weathered sign on the abandoned pharmacy. The legal system, slow and ugly as a farm machine, began to grind. State bureau teams tore open the memorial wing with warrants and lights and camera crews watching from barricades. They found Alice where Silas said she'd be. Partial remains wrapped in construction fill beneath the slab, moved at least once before final concealment. Forensics tied the secondary fragments from Section E to the same set of remains. The diary, the Polaroid, the class ring, the building records, and the panic around the attempted ambush at the mill formed a shape no local fix could smooth away. Charges came in waves: obstruction, evidence tampering, conspiracy, abuse of office. Homicide-related counts argued and revised as prosecutors built the oldest case of their careers. The county and state papers feasted on every filing. National crews came too for a while, sniffing around the town that buried a girl under its own history. Some left when they realized the story had less glamour than grime. Silas preferred those departures. Robert Caskey was led from the courthouse, not in a suit of power, but in handcuffs and a winter coat he hadn't bothered to button. Thomas Daughtry resigned before being formally removed, though the resignation changed nothing. Elias Mercer's lawyers fought hardest, but wealth could only delay daylight, not stop it. The town split, as towns do. Some said they'd always suspected. Some said they were shocked. Some insisted the charges were exaggerated, that old men were being tried for youth gone wrong, that outsiders were punishing Clear Creek for sins every town had once hidden. But more and more people stopped saying that last part out loud, because Alice had a face now, a name restored to the room. A mother's old neighbors were interviewed. Teachers remembered her. One woman found a yearbook note. Another admitted she'd seen bruises once and told herself she must have imagined them. People began speaking her name without lowering their voices. Martha Vance had been dead 23 years by then. The state arranged to move her remains beside her daughter once the burial could finally be done proper. When Silas heard that, he sat alone in the cemetery shed for a long time with his cap in his hands. Justice, he learned, did not feel like triumph. It felt like grief finally allowed to stand up straight. On the morning of the burial, the cemetery was washed clean in early sun. No choking fog, no iron sky, just cool air smelling of wet grass, turned loam, pine sap, and the first warm lift from earth after a cold season. The old oaks around Section E held fresh leaf tips pale as new coins. Birds made themselves heard without apology. Silas stood by the open grave with his shovel planted in the ground. This one he had dug himself, start to finish. He would have allowed no other hands on it. The plot lay not in the forgotten corner where lies had hidden, but on a gentle rise under two old oaks where the morning light reached early. Deep, square, lined right. The kind of grave made for the honored dead, not the concealed ones. His back ached more these days. The mill bruises had healed yellow, then green, then gone, but they left a memory in the arm. His hair had gone whiter over the past weeks, or maybe the truth just made it seem so. He looked older because he was older. That was all right. A small gathering waited nearby. No brass band, no civic speeches. Just the right people. 2 state investigators. Daniel Klein with his notebook tucked away for once. A minister who knew enough to keep his words simple. Some old women from town. A few former classmates with lined faces and uncertain hands. Bev from the cemetery office. Jolene from the diner, holding a paper cup she'd forgotten to drink. Even Harold, the bent mine retiree who challenged Daughtry in the memorial wing, stood in a clean jacket and hat. Wordless, decent people. That was enough. Alice's remains came in a modest casket, cream-colored, no nonsense to it. Martha's smaller casket rested beside it, to be lowered into the adjoining plot after. Mother and daughter finally pulled back into each other's orbit by time, pain, and one stubborn gravedigger. Silas watched the pallbearers set Alice's casket over the straps. The wood caught sunlight along the edges. Somewhere beyond the cemetery, a dog barked and a truck changed gears on the county road. Life went on. That felt right too. The minister began with scripture, then stopped after a few lines and looked at the gathered faces. "We are here," he said, "because truth should not have needed half a century to reach this hill. But it has. And so today we do not just commit remains to the earth. We return dignity to a child of this town." No one said amen out loud, but the silence after carried agreement. When it came time, Silas stepped forward. He was not a speaking man in public. Never had been. But the room in town hall had taught him one thing. There are moments when a plain voice matters more because it has not been overused. He removed his cap. "Alice Vance belonged here the whole time," he said. The words came slow, each one laid down like a board. She belonged in daylight, in memory, in the company of her own people. Not under lies, not under buildings, not under men who thought money could outlast the truth. He looked at the casket, then at the grave, then at the oak leaves moving above. "I didn't do enough for her when I was young," he said. "A lot of us didn't. We let power talk us deaf. I can't fix that part. None of us can. But I can do this." He nodded to the grave. "I can lay her down right." That was all. More would have spoiled it. The straps creaked softly as Alice was lowered. Sunlight moved over the polished lid. Then the casket slipped below the level of the ground and came to rest in shadow, in peace. Silas took up the shovel. The first spadeful of earth is always the heaviest, not because of weight, because it is the moment a burial becomes real. He lifted the soil, a rich brown mix smelling of roots and clean depth, and laid it gently over the casket lid. The sound came back soft and right. Not a concealment sound, not hurried. A true burial sound, final without being cruel. One by one, others stepped forward after him. Jolene with shaking hands. Bev, Harold, Daniel Klein, awkward but sincere. The investigators, the classmates, a little line of responsibility moving through the morning. When Martha was lowered beside her daughter, some of the old women cried openly then. Silas did not look away. Tears belonged at graves, always had. By noon, the mounds were dressed smooth and neat. The stones were ready too. For Martha. Martha Vance, beloved mother. For Alice, the new marble caught the sun in a clean pale flash. Silas knelt to brush the last clinging dirt from the carved letters. Alice Vance, 1958-1976. Never forgotten. He sat back on his heels and read it once more. Never forgotten. The phrase was imperfect. She had been forgotten, or nearly. That was the wound. But maybe the stone meant something else. Not a lie about the past, a promise for the future. He rose slowly, one hand on his knee, and took the tamper to settle the earth. Thump, lift, thump. The rhythm had lived in his body for 40 years. Usually it marked endings. Today it felt like the first honest thing the town had done in a long while. Around him, people lingered instead of rushing off. They spoke quietly, shared bits of memory, asked one another careful questions. No one tried to make the day pretty. That was mercy. The sunlight kept warming. By early afternoon, the cemetery no longer held that old clenched feeling in the chest. Even Section E, off in its fog-haunted corner, looked less like a mouth holding secrets and more like ground that had given them up. Daniel Klein came over as the others drifted toward their cars. "You all right?" he asked. Silas leaned on the shovel handle and looked at the two fresh stones. "As much as anybody gets." Klein nodded. "State says this case will change a lot of things." "Maybe." "You don't sound convinced." Silas watched a breeze move through the young leaves over Alice's grave. Towns don't change because papers say they should. They change when folks get tired of swallowing what powerful men hand them. Klein gave a small smile. "You helped with that," Silas shrugged. "Earth did most of it. I just listened." Klein stood there a second longer, then offered his hand. Silas took it. When everyone else had gone, Silas stayed. He always stayed after the crowd. It was part of the work, part of respect. He set the floral sprays right, checked the soil one last time, and trimmed a stray root at the edge with his knife. Then he stood between the two graves in the afternoon sun. The town below lay quiet in the valley. From here he could see the courthouse clock, the church steeples, the line of the creek flashing now and then through trees. Clear Creek looked almost gentle from above. Maybe someday it would earn that look. Silas took off his cap and held it against his chest. "Well," he said softly, not sure to whom exactly. "Alice, Martha, Ruth, himself at 22. There you are." The breeze answered through the oaks with a joyous living whisper. He put the cap back on, patted the earth one final time with his weathered palm, and walked toward his truck. Behind him, the headstone stood straight in the sun, and for the first time in nearly 50 years, the ground over Alice Vance felt unburdened.